Humanity is innumerable, spread across the stars, with a military might befitting a galaxy-spanning empire like the Imperium. And yet, for all their numbers, there are a few individuals within humanity, or those ascended beyond it, who have become renowned even amongst their peers. In this series of vlogs, we shall take a look at some of those Adeptus Astartes of particular legend in this modern era, known collectively as the Champions of Humanity. Today, we come to what I suppose you could call the capital world of Imperium Nihilus, to take a look at the regent of the Dark Imperium. However, this individual has been a legend since long before this new age, being the oldest living space marine aside from dreadnoughts and those who have used suspended animation, and serving as leader of the sons of one of the most loved and famous Primarchs. Born on the moon of Baal Secundus, he is the chapter master of the Blood Angels, simply known as Commander Dante. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Champions of Humanity, a 40k Stories miniseries. In mid-M40 on Baal Secundus, the moon on which the Blood Angels Primarch Sanguinius landed following the scattering of the Primarchs by the Chaos Gods, a boy named Luis was born. Though we do not know if he kept the name, this was the child who would become Dante, future Lord of the Blood Angels. However, Baal Secundus was and still is irradiated, and though the harsh environment did not affect the Primarch adversely, it did affect Dante, whose growth was stunted in combination with malnutrition. We do not know the tribe he was raised in, but he took part in the once-per-generation recruitment trials held by the Blood Angels. This involved a danger-fraught pilgrimage to Angel's Fall, the place at which Sanguinius landed all those millennia ago, followed by massive gladiatorial combat from which 50 are selected and taken to Baal itself. After then holding a 72-hour vigil without sleep and drinking from a chalice believed to contain a portion of the angel's blood, Dante and the remaining aspirants fell into a year-long coma. But it seems as though Dante's sleep was rather fitful, even if, unlike others, he did not die, nor did he lose his mind. Instead, perhaps uniquely, he spent time in his sleep screaming the names of Primarchs and demons, particularly the traitor Primarchs, and even names of dark gods. Part of me is surprised he was spared death for the potential of corruption, given the borderline paranoia of the Imperium about chaos these days. When Dante did awaken, though, he wasn't condemned or reprimanded, but instead elevated like the others not dead or insane to the full ranks of Astartes, joining the Blood Angels. He then served in, we assume, the Scout, Devastator, Assault and Tactical companies like any member of a Codex-compliant chapter. I know the Blood Angels officially are not Codex-compliant, but they're incredibly close to it in terms of structure and operation. They just have a few notable exceptions. He then became a sergeant, though in what sort of squad we do not know, before being elevated to captain in 753 M40 in command of, we assume, the 8th Company. Makes me think he was an assault sergeant, as the 8th is a reserve assault company. There he stayed until late in the millennium, at which point the chapter was called in to aid their successor, the Angels Numinous, with an uprising in the Callius subsector, location sadly unknown. Unfortunately, this uprising was a bit more than anyone was planning. Despite being known as the Callius Insurrection, the war was far beyond that, with large numbers of Chaos Space Marine warbands getting involved. Only 3 companies, including Dante's, were initially committed, but the entirety of the Blood Angels chapter ended up dragged in. Years went by, and though the enemy death count ran into the millions, the Blood Angels took heavy losses too. At its worst, 90% of the chapter were wiped out in their attempt to reclaim the subsector, and only reinforcement from other Imperials gave them even a hint of respite. Even then, they were caught in a vicious void war as a traitor fleet sensed their weakness and tried to wipe them out, and Dante was personally involved in the taking of no less than 7 capital ships during this battle. This, combined with the fact that literally every other captain died in the Callius insurrection, meant that Dante was elected by the chaplaincy and the sanguinary priesthood as the chapter master of the Blood Angels. Given this was in late M40, this means that by this point in late M42, Dante has been leader of the Sons of Sanguinius for over 1,000 years, which combined with his life before makes him the oldest living Astartes not interred in a dreadnought nor using suspended animation to our knowledge. You may be wondering how Dante has survived this long, given Space Marines are not biologically immortal after all, they're not the Custodes. The reason for this is primarily the gene seed of the Blood Angels. Along with the well-known and rightly feared flaw that leads to the Red Thirst and Black Rage, it also greatly extends the lifespan of those implanted with it. Whether Dante's extremely long life of over 1,500 years is typical for Blood Angels not killed in battle, or whether he is still an extreme outlier, is a little less clear. Roboute Guilliman, when he met him, remarked that perhaps even the Emperor did not expect the Astartes to live as long as Dante, despite having no evidence from the Master of Mankind to confirm it. So I suspect he's more likely to be the extreme case than the average one, though a Blood Angel would need to live and die naturally for us to verify it. Frustratingly, Dante's combat record following his ascension to Chapter Master is, well, it's full of holes. Though I doubt he was involved in a huge amount of battles relative to his captains, instead being in overall command or overseeing things on Baal, etc., I'm sad to report that, from my research, around 1,000 years go by until we can confirm his presence on a battlefield. We do know he sent 3 companies to aid the Ultramarines after the Battle for Macragge against Hive Fleet Behemoth, but he was not there personally. We also know that Baal was actually invaded by Orcs not long after the defeat of Behemoth, with the various chapter dreadnoughts proving vital in stopping the Greenskins from actually overrunning the planet. But again, even if I highly suspect he was there, Dante's presence is unconfirmed. We also know that he's been involved in some undated battles or campaigns, fighting around Ultima Macaria in Segmentum Pacificus, and also said to have banished the fallen bloodthirster Scarbrand at an unknown place called the Gates of Pandemonium. However, the first time I can date Dante being involved in fighting after his ascension came in the Second War of Armageddon, though I'm sure he has been elsewhere in the interim time, perhaps in the examples I gave above. Dante, along with others including Marnius Calgar of the Ultramarines and Tushan of the Salamanders, responded to the distress call of Commissar Yarrick sent as War Ghazghkull threatened to sweep aside Armageddon. They arrived in time, and despite the reputation of the other Astartes present, Dante was unanimously voted as the overall commander of Imperial forces, deposing incompetent overlord Hermann von Straub in the process. The arrival of the Astartes came somewhat unannounced, however, as Dante personally led a daring drop assault on Acheron Hive, one of the last bastions for the Imperials in the face of the Orcs, but one teetering on the brink of falling. With aid from the tenacious Hivers, Acheron was not only held by the intervention of the Space Marines, but War Ghazghkull was handed its first of a string of defeats that would ultimately see the Armageddon War lost. Dante would be personally involved in combat a second time, leading a daring, perhaps even suicidal assault on the Orc headquarters in an attempt to capture Ghazghkull. Unfortunately, the Prophet of the War just happened to be at the front lines at that moment, meaning he did not cross paths with Dante. Makes me wonder who would win in that scenario, and though today I might favour Ghazghkull, back then I think Dante would have had the Orcs' number. Suppose it's one of those what might have been moments, because it would have potentially changed the fate of the galaxy for so many. Whether Dante was involved in any of the other battles in the last stage of the war is unknown, including the siege of Tartarus Hive, the final attempt to save Hades Hive, or the last Orc assault at the Skeletus River led by Ghazghkull, who had been thought killed at Tartarus but of course had survived. We also do not know how much Dante chose to aid in Armageddon's recovery after the war was officially won. He doesn't strike me as the sort to not care at all about civilians, but that sort of thing is more of Tushan's stick than it is his. Dante was also not involved in the Third War of Armageddon, though a company of Blood Angels under Captain Tycho was present there, and it would be in 995 M41 that I can next confirm his presence. The Gehenna campaign pitted the Blood Angels and Dante against Necron forces under none other than the returned Silent King, Cesarak. After 3 weeks of fighting that stretched Dante's tactical mind to the limit, the battle between the two became something of a no contest, as a Tyranid splinter fleet appeared above Gehenna. In a turn in events I doubt many would have predicted before, the Necrons and Astartes were able to forge an alliance against the Tyranids, eventually winning out after heavy fighting. In the aftermath, despite the opportunity for betrayal by either side, the two allies went their separate ways peacefully. None know the intentions of the Silent King, but it is thought that Dante found the idea of turning on an ally distasteful, even if he was a Xenos. Which is a good thing, I would say. Nice to see a little bit of honour and decency and respect to the Imperium from time to time. Only 3 years after the Gehenna campaign, Dante would see combat with the Tyranids again. But this time he would see far less success as the Blood Angels teetered toward the brink of destruction for the second time in his life. He led the first and second companies of the Blood Angels alongside the Flesh Terrors in the Cryptus campaign just southwest of Baal, attempting to either starve out or at the very least stall the encroaching Hive Fleet Leviathan. Though huge amounts of Imperials died, the actions of the Blood Angels were successful. On Asphodex, Dante led the first company and managed to defeat the Tyranids in defending their objectives. Not long after, the Necron-Mefrit dynasty emerged thanks to Anrakir the Traveller's efforts in awakening them, and the Necrons managed to strike a deal with Dante for the second time. Through the combined efforts of the Imperium and Necrons, an ancient weapon known as the Magnovitrium was activated, causing a gas giant planet in the system to explode. This wiped out the Tyranids in the system, along with a not insignificant amount of biomass for the rest of the Hive Fleet behind them, but only at great cost to especially the Imperials. And it still wasn't enough. Despite trying to starve and damage Leviathan at every turn, the Hive Fleet still arrived in strength in the Baal system itself. However, they did not face the Blood Angels alone, for Dante had requested aid from all of the Sons of Sanguinius who could come to help defend their ancestral home. Thus, elements of 20 chapters, including the remnants of the reconciled renegades, the Knights of Blood, gathered on Baal. The numbers were such that, though it was hardly the size of its heyday, it was like the Ninth Legion had come home and come together one last time. And it so nearly was a last time for all of them, as the entire system was all but overrun. Only the Arx Angelicum, the fortress monastery of the chapter on Baal itself, held for any length of time, but eventually the Tyranids were able to breach its defences too, using infiltration and underground assaults. Eventually, it was bad enough that Dante did not believe the Arx Angelicum could even be held, and yet an opportunity had also presented itself. The Cicatrix Maledictum had appeared across the galaxy. Although Baal Primus had been lost to the Tyranids and then to demons under Kabanda, the backlash of the Great Rift had either hurt or otherwise blocked the hive mind. There were accounts of Tyranids screaming, such as the agony it seemed to cause them or their over-controlling consciousness. This left the Tyranids as vulnerable as they were likely ever going to get, and rather than wait them out or let them recover or adapt, Dante and the surviving Sons of Sanguinius instead sallied from the Arx Angelicum. They could not win, they knew they could not win, but they would rather die in the open field than simply be overrun. Such was the finality of this decision. The Tower of Amareo was opened and its occupants released, unleashing the entirety of the Death Company in one last glorious death charge. This was not a move made lightly, but it showed this was a point of no return. And though they died in their droves, Dante allowed the Red Thirst to take him for the first time in centuries and led the Blood Angels ever onward, even as the Legion of the Damned and, if he wasn't hallucinating, the Sanguinor appeared to aid them. Eventually, he found himself one-on-one with the Swarm Lord, leader beast of the Tyranids, even as the Black Rage or something similar began to intrude on his mind and he saw visions of Horus where the Tyranids should be. Nonetheless, he fought through the rage and he was finally able to slay the Swarm Lord, though he was gravely, fatally wounded in the act. Dante began to die, and as he did so, he had another vision, this time of what he believed to be the Sanguinor, but then he realized it was none other than Sanguinius himself. However, rather than be a welcoming committee for Dante into whatever afterlife there may be, The Primarch's spirit, if that's what it was there to bar the metaphorical pearly gates. Despite wanting to die, begging his gene father for death and release, Dante was denied by Sanguinius, who apologized profusely but commanded his son to live. And then Dante was alive, awake, and in the hands of the apothecaries. Over him was the first captain, who had returned from another campaign in the 13th Black Crusade, and despite the insistence of the apothecary, Dante was on his feet to see the new miracle that had, during his time unconscious, saved Baal. Led by his first captain, he came face to face with the Primaris Space Marines, even speaking to them, before coming before the Adeptus Custodes, and with an apologetic nod in the right direction from Cato Sicarius, coming face to face with Roboute Guilliman. The Indomitus Crusade had arrived at Baal, helping to liberate it and rebuild the Sons of Sanguinius, who had almost broken the Hive Fleet, and Dante fell to his knees upon seeing the returned Primarch he had only seen before in stasis on Macragge. However, Guilliman was having none of it, and with a little less ceremony than perhaps was warranted, hauled the still grievously wounded Dante up with a hint of a smile. Dante apologized profusely for his near failure to save Baal, and fell unconscious again before he could hear Guilliman say that there was nothing to forgive. He eventually recovered, and despite a heated argument with Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Terrors regarding the new Astartes, he welcomed the rebuilding of the chapters with Primaris reinforcement. Before Guilliman and the Indomitus Crusade moved on, having made what would be their final stop on the far side of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Primarch had one last request for Dante. He named the chapter master as Warden of Imperium Nihilus, placing him in overall command of all Imperial forces in the Dark Imperium. Before long, the Indomitus Crusade departed to an exploding Baal Primus which had been marked by Kabanda, and weary as he was after 1,500 years of war and 1,000 or more of command, Dante assumed the mantle Guilliman had left for him. He now stands as Warden, leading the rebuilt Blood Angels in this new era, and whilst he may not truly be Sanguinius, especially with the return of his brother, he is a beacon of hope for all. We do know the Blood Angels have seen combat again in this new era on several occasions, and of course Dante has joined them. We do not know how many wars he has fought in, but he did see action in the Dormet system, driving back the Black Legion alongside successor the Carmine Blades and forces of Talon, along with Astorath the Grim, and the surprise appearance of the Sanguinor with whom Dante had spoken after Cryptus, the very first time the Sanguinor had ever been known to speak. So, now you know the story of Dante. But before we conclude his tale, let's take a look at what we know of his personality and his war gear, as well as address a certain something that may have been on your mind. Dante is armed with a power axe called the Axe Mortalis and an Infernus or Melter pistol known as the Perdition Pistol. The latter of the two is ancient, truly ancient, dating all the way back to the Dark Age of technology, in fact. The Infernus Pistol itself is a weapon uniquely found amongst the Blood Angels, almost impossible to make today, and a variant on the Inferno pistols wielded by a few members of the Ordo Hereticus and the Adeptus Sororitas. The former, the Axe Mortalis, is the slightly younger weapon, having been fashioned not long after the Horus Heresy by a renowned armourer of the Blood Angels. Whether it has always been the weapon of the chapter master is unknown, but it is not uncommon for such a weapon to be a symbol of office, so I would not be surprised. Dante is protected in battle by an ornate suit of artificer armour with a jump pack, though unlike the Sanguinary Guard who serve as his guardians, it does not bear wings either functional or decorative. Perhaps actually he should consider getting them, however, given his other unique piece of war gear, the Death Mask of Sanguinius. Modelled supposedly on the features of the 9th Primarch, the mask actually incorporates a small amount of his blood into the gem on its forehead. When Dante goes to war, it is said the mask comes to life as though Sanguinius was truly there amongst them, though in truth this is far more likely to be the effect of the halo mortalis that surrounds the mask and projects a field of terror as a golden halo. Interestingly, to Dante the death mask is more than just a weapon or a symbol, it is truly a mask, something that he can hide behind in some ways. For all his age and all his skill, Dante has become weary in ways whilst remaining incredibly humble. Even after 1,000 years of command, longer than perhaps Sanguinius was even alive, he does not believe himself worthy of his father's mantle, even more so after the return of Guilliman, showing what the Primarchs were truly like. And he is tired, so tired. Remember, he begged Sanguinius, or whatever it was, to let him die after he killed the Swarm Lord on Baal. But despite this, despite being weighed down by the burdens of the centuries, his resolve has never broken and his devotion has never wavered. Even now, his mind is incredibly sharp for perceiving the weaknesses of his foes. He never misses a slip, and thanks to his jump pack he can arrive and exploit it personally in a heartbeat. He leads from the front and is utterly fearless, and though he does not always see himself as positively as others, he knows his status. Even to the common citizenry of the Imperium before his ascension to Warden, Dante is a legend, a hero, a saviour even, and his presence is inspiring both to human and Astartes alike. There are many Astartes who can remember Dante as chapter master when they were in the Scout Company, and that says something for how much he is respected. And despite his age and weariness, he still has a purpose driving him forward beyond simple service or desire to fight. There is a prophecy contained within a document known as the Scrolls of Sanguinius that tell of the angel's visions. This prophecy in particular tells of a battle beyond all others, in which a golden warrior stands seemingly alone between the Emperor and the darkness. Many interpret this as an abstract version of Sanguinius' own future, as the Primarch would stand against Horus, the leader of the Chaos forces at the Battle of Terror at the end of the Horus Heresy. However, Dante sees things rather differently, perhaps gifted with a fraction of his gene father's foresight like some others in the Blood Angels. As a result, he stands continually ready to fulfill what may well be his destiny as the Golden Warrior, and in some ways you could say his role as the Dark Imperium's regent is a representation of this. Whether the ancient Dante will fulfill the prophecy remains to be seen, but if, as we believe, Sanguinius himself demanded him to live, somehow I would not be surprised. So ends the tale of Commander Luis Dante, assuming that was his old human name at least. The chapter master of the Blood Angels and Warden of Imperium Nihilus is an icon and an inspiration to human and Astartes alike. A deadly warrior even in old age, with a mind as sharp as ever, Dante is one of very few to stand against the Hive Fleet and emerge as victorious as he did. And if destiny calls from the prophecy of the Golden Warrior, he will be ready to answer. This is the first log in Champions of Humanity, a new series of logs pertaining to the greatest modern-era Space Marines. As per Legions and Regiments of Renown, our old series of logs, we will alternate between these and other miscellaneous ones. Next time, I think it might be a good idea to better know the enemy that nearly collapsed Baal, despite all the efforts of Dante and the successors. Though long ago we discussed their race and their infamous members, I think it might be good to discuss the various groups of them that have caused such havoc all across the galaxy. For now though, it is time to end. Thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis and the first part of Champions of Humanity, a 40k Stories miniseries. I'll see you all again. Goodbye.